Let's talk about godly leadership in the church. That's important, isn't it? We know it's important because of the nature of the church, what the church is. The church is the bride of Christ. And just as your bride is important to you, and you love her, and you cherish her, and you would fight for her, so the Lord loves His church. And the church is the body of Christ. How important is the body to the head? It's pretty important, isn't it? The church is the kingdom of the King. Christ is the King, and the church is the family of God. God is our Father. You know, there are a lot of people nowadays that are saying, yes, I want to have faith. I want to have Christ. I want to have some sort of Christianity in my life, but I want it apart from any church. And I want to have it on my own terms. And that is very common. I know that's a movement that's not new, but it's common again with new terms. That's just how these things go. They come back and then you have new terminology. But the reality is, you cannot be a Christian apart from the church. You're not a part of God's kingdom apart from the church. You're not a part of the bride of Christ apart from the church. You're not a part of the body of Christ apart from the church. You're not a part of the family of God apart from the church, because that's what the church is. The church is extremely important. That ought to affect the way I view the church as well, and my behavior in the church. So what about the individual that comes along and decides, well, the church then must be a situation where I could probably gain a little glory and praise in the church, and maybe even a little power and influence. I think I'm going to go about my service to the Lord in the church in such a way that's going to make me famous. And when I walk in a room, I want everybody to think, there's the big shot right there. Should I view the church that way? If I think in terms of the church being the bride of Christ and how important that is to Him, He died for her. When I think in terms of the church being His body, do I want to go in there and see the church as some sort of playground for my own personal glory and selfish ambition? Certainly not. Certainly not. It is not my church. It is God's. It is not my church. It is the Lord's. And I need to be very careful about the attitudes that I have toward God's church. We'll do this in a very similar fashion to what we did concerning leadership in the home. Let's talk about some biblical examples from the Old Covenant, and then we'll talk about biblical principles from the New Covenant under which we now live. First of all, let's talk about some examples from the Old Covenant. There was Joseph. He did eventually become a leader, didn't he? He became second in command to Pharaoh, and one of the qualities that he had as a leader was that he was forgiving. How did Joseph get to that position? Through a whole lot of suffering, didn't he? God was working through all that all along. I don't know how much Joseph was aware of what God was planning and what God was working. There may have been times when Joseph was wondering why things keep going wrong. They go well and they go wrong, they go well, they go wrong. But God was preparing him for a specific task, that of leading the nation of Egypt in such a way that they would be prepared for the famine that would save his family. But Joseph shows us an amazing heart of forgiveness. In Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20, his brothers, when they sold him into slavery, they meant it for evil, didn't they? But God meant it for good, and he sees that, and he recognizes that, and he treats his brothers accordingly, doesn't he? He blesses them. He forgives them. Good leaders are going to be that way. Good leaders are going to be those that are humble, meek, those that are willing to serve others, especially with regard to our relationship with God. We serve God. Moses was probably one of the greatest national leaders the world's ever known. And he had an amazing relationship with God that was very unique, wasn't it? And here was a man who was able to be strong even up to around the age of 120. Didn't he still have some strength that a young man might have even when he died? He was a man who was strong at 40 years old. He was a man who was strong at 80 years old. Here was a man who still had some of that strength at 120 years old. He's got the leadership of a nation. He's got all this physical strength. Did he go around saying, look how great I am? Look how wonderful I am. Look at my strength. Look at my authority and my power. Why is it that so many people in this world want to tell everybody else what to do? Why is it that so many people in this world just want to have control over somebody else's life? Oh, let me tell you how to do it. Let me smash you down. Let me twist the screws down on top of you and let me make you live the way I want you to live. And you have no freedom. Why are people like that? You see that in political leaders all the time. You certainly wouldn't see that in the church, would you? Well, there was a man by the name of Rutherford, but Moses wasn't like that. As a leader among God's people, Israel were God's saints back then, weren't they? They were God's people then. And they had a leader named Moses that God appointed, and Moses was humble. Moses was humble. There is not a man in any leadership position in the Lord's church today that should be arrogant. Not a one. Every single leader in the Lord's church today needs to be a humble man like Moses. Caleb, Numbers chapter 14, verse 24. Don't you love reading about Caleb there? You know the spies went in the land, came back, and they were saying, oh, we cannot take the land. And at first the only one to speak up in favor of God's plan, which was let's go in and take it, we can surely do it, was Caleb. Later Joshua joins him. Moses and Aaron are unusually quiet about the matter. People rise up, they're going to stone them, and God intervenes at that point. But God says, Caleb had a different spirit. And God blesses Caleb because of it. Caleb's spirit was one of complete and full trust in God. God said they can go into the land and take it. Caleb said, we'll do it. We can go in the land and take it. Let's get up and do it. Well, the people are too big, and their walls are too big, and the people are too strong. Let's get up and go do it. God says we can do it. We can go do it. That's Caleb's attitude. That's a leader right there. God says, do it. Let's do it. God says, get it done so it can be done. That's Caleb's attitude. He had a different spirit. He was trusting in God. Nehemiah praying. You can look at the book of Nehemiah and have a quarter-long or a year-long study in leadership just from that book alone, can't you? And there's so many tremendous principles that you can bring out from the life of Nehemiah and the way that he led in one series. There were identified 12 different principles of leadership right there in the book of Nehemiah itself. But here's one from chapter 1. He prayed. He knew that he had to rely on God. Nehemiah understood that he had limits, and he understood that there were things that he could not control, things that he couldn't do anything about, and yet there was one who can do anything that he wants to do, and that is God. And so Nehemiah knew, I'm weak, I'm limited, God can do anything he wants, I'm going to go to God in prayer. That's what leaders do in the church. Leaders know their own weaknesses, they know they have limits, but they know God has no limits, and leaders put their trust in God, and leaders pray to God, and leaders pray to God fervently, pouring out their hearts and souls before God, even in their private prayers. And then together, leaders pray. And then leaders pray with the congregation and pray with others. Leaders in the Lord's church are praying people who fully trust in God, who fully rely on God, and who tell Him everything. Let's consider some biblical principles from the New Covenant then. Well, what about worship? Obviously, worship is an issue that is always going to be controversial from the standpoint of what should be done in worship, how it should be done, those kinds of things. Nowadays, leadership in worship is also an issue. If you look at the words there in the context of 1 Timothy chapter 2, you see the Apostle Paul going from saying a number of things about people in general, men and women, and then specifically saying, now the male lifts up holy hands in prayer in a situation in that context where there's male and female. But I want you to think about the fact that not only is it the male leading here, but he's to lift up holy hands. Do you know how serious it is to come in on Sunday and lead on the Lord's table? Do you know how serious it is to to offer up those prayers at the Lord's table? Do you know how serious it is to lead a prayer in worship on Sunday? To lead the singing, to read a scripture, to preach? If you do, it'll scare you to death. Because we are worshiping God the way He wants to be worshiped, but we're showing great reverence for God. And if we have some understanding of who He is and how great He is, then we understand this. When I come in to lead in worship, it is a very serious matter, and I must show great reverence for God, and I have to do it in such a way that is designed to glorify Him, never me, always Him, and there should be some fear involved in that. And we need to be thinking in terms of, okay, I'm leading prayer Sunday morning. I want to start thinking about that, earlier in the week. And I want to think in terms of being ready to do it, not just from what you want to say, but from the standpoint of who I am. And I'm not saying that you can be someone who's sinless. You've already blown that, right? We've all sinned, fallen short of the glory of God. But we had better take seriously the fact that God says it needs to be holy hands that are lifted in prayer. Holy hands. And so I want to make sure, to the best of my ability, my relationship is right with God. And I'm going to take care of anything I need to take care of, and I'm going to pray to God even before I go in and lead a prayer in worship before others. Maybe at home before I go, or the night before, or that morning, I'm praying to God, help me to do this in a way that shows reverence for you and brings glory to you. Help me to stand before your people pure and holy in your sight. Help me to lift up holy hands. So you see the significance of leadership in worship. But people are so interested in making worship whatever they want it to be, from the standpoint of entertainment or from the standpoint of women taking roles that God does not allow them to have, that worship becomes something that is so superficial and silly at times. Sometimes worship is nothing but a big rock concert or whatever the case may be. Sometimes worship is a glorify me, praise me, let's praise each other kind of a situation rather than a fear and reverence for God. I want to come in there and make sure that if I'm going to lead in worship, I'm going to lift up holy hands. So think carefully about it when you're leading in worship. It's a very serious matter. Leadership in the church from the standpoint of the eldership. It is the case that if men are qualified to be elders, if they fit these qualifications that are given here, they will do a good job as elders. They will. If anybody can fit these qualifications, and there are men that do, the men that do will be good at it. And they will serve the Lord well in that capacity. 1 Timothy chapter 3, this is a faithful saying, if a man desires the position of a bishop, overseer, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. What if you have a man who is known by the community to be an ill-tempered, bitter man, who does not behave himself like he should in the way he treats other people, but he's an elder in the local congregation? What does that do for the reputation of the church? What does that do from the standpoint of that particular individual? He is not obedient unto God. He is not qualified. Why would he take the position in the first place? And there are so many cases where individuals will look at these qualifications and know at times even that they don't fulfill all of these qualifications and still want to have the position of an elder. Why? Self-glory? What's the problem with that? The problem is it'll damn your soul to hell. We can't have that kind of an attitude in the church. We have to do things God's way. That is the absolute and only way to do it. I can't look through here and say, well, I've got most of these, but here's a few of them I don't have here. I think I should be appointed as an elder. No. Absolutely not. God knows what He's doing, doesn't He? God says, here's the way it needs to be. And so that's what we do. Look at Titus chapter 1 and some of the things Titus says here. It goes along with what Paul said there. He says, "For this reason," verse 5, "I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking, and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you. If a man is blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. For a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convict those who contradict. For there are many insubordinate, both idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole households, teaching things which they ought not, for the sake of dishonest gain." So any man that is entering into the office of an elder needs to study these very carefully. And it is a good thing for him to desire that office because we need elders, don't we? But then he needs to understand the serious nature of what he's doing. And just as there should be some fear and reverence involved in us choosing to be a part or being selected to be a part of leading in worship, there should be some fear of God in becoming an elder. You have sometimes in the Lord's church, and I know situations, I could tell all kinds of stories, but you have sometimes in the Lord's church situations where an individual is politicking and with his great personality and his brilliance at shaking hands, kissing babies, he has become very, very popular in the church. Hey, that man should be an elder. Okay, maybe. But you know the word selfish ambition, Philippians chapter 2, has to do with politicking. And Paul said in Philippians chapter 2, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition." Nothing. Think carefully. Maybe a man's just friendly. That'd be a good thing. Elders need to be there, hospitable, right? And maybe he is a good man. Maybe he's qualified. But just because he's friendly doesn't mean he's qualified. So be careful what you think when it comes to the eldership. It is the case that men must fit these qualifications to be appointed as elders in the Lord's church. This is God's way. There's no compromise in this that's going to please God. This is what God demands. And when